poll. The Conservative vote remains at a flat 21% this week, leaving Labour with half of the national vote, according to the poll.
This comes just after the West Lancashire by-election, of course, which saw Labour's Ashley Dalton voted in as the new MP. She got 8,000 more votes than her Conservative counterpart for the region.
So how can the Conservatives expect to come back from this historic defeat? Here to talk to us is politics professor and academic Matt Goodwin. Good to see you, Matt. So just tell us, how can they come back?
It's going to be very, very difficult in the poll numbers this week. We've got the Conservatives, as you say, all the way down on 21% of the vote. This is a historic low coming just before those spring local elections. Don't forget, we've seen a by-election defeat for the Conservatives overnight, but we've got those local elections in the spring. And I'm telling you, if I was in Rishi Sunak's team looking at these numbers, I'd be pretty worried, because you're looking at something equivalent to a sort of 1997 style wipeout unless things begin to change. So these numbers are pretty bleak for the Conservatives.
Looking at other figures, we're going to talk about this a little bit later on, Matt. Let's look at what else you've been asking as well. This is a top one. I mean, in some respects it doesn't surprise me. In other respects it does a little. Boris Johnson, the most popular Prime Minister since the 2019 election. Are you surprised or not?
Do you know what? I'm not surprised, really. We've had three Prime Ministers, haven't we? We've gone through Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, now Rishi Sunak. We said to all voters, which one of those is your favourite? Boris comes top. Interestingly, among 2019 Conservative voters, those voters Rishi Sunak needs to win back, it's not even close. Over half of Conservative voters say Boris is their first choice. About 18%, 1/8, say Rishi Sunak. So look, whatever you think about Boris Johnson, whether you love him, whether you loathe him, he still has a significant amount of star power in British politics. He still does connect with a certain section of the electorate. And I suspect that if the Conservatives have a very difficult set of local elections in the spring, all this talk about a sort of, looming challenge to Rishi Sunak in the background. We saw Liz Truss last week. We've seen Boris Johnson on manoeuvres. I suspect that is going to escalate over the summer, and we'll be having a renewed debate about potentially the return of some of these big beasts within the Conservatives.
You may as well just press the self... I mean, if they're going to do that, if they're going to look at changing at the top again, they may as well just press the self-destruct button, mightn't they?
Well, look, I mean, the other thing we find, this is how bad things are, actually, I think, for the Conservatives. We said to voters this week, which party do you think is best able to manage Brexit? Right now, this is a Conservative Party issue. Conservative Party have basically claimed Brexit. They sort of own Brexit. You would expect the Conservatives to at least be ahead on that issue. But this week we find Labour are 1 point ahead of the Conservatives, even on Brexit. So whether we look at the economy, whether we look at National Health Service, whether we look at inflation, cost of living, and now also Brexit, also, by the way, immigration, this is a massive problem for the Conservatives, because they have to own some issues. They have to be able to say, those are our issues, and we're going to hold that line until the next election. But actually, even on Brexit, we find they're falling behind. And this rings very, very loud alarm bells to me. It just shows that the party doesn't seem to be connecting with people, doesn't seem to be giving people a clear sense of purpose. And that's really a big problem going into these local elections and potentially that big 24 general election.
I wonder what you make of this, Matt. Steve in Cleethorpes has been in touch. Morning, Steve. He says, as one of the grey voters who always votes and supports the Tory party, even I fully expect Labour to win the next election, and to be fair, my party does not deserve to. Now, if that is a sentiment which is being reflected, then that's actually a major issue, isn't it, for the government?
I think Steve is reflecting a broader view. Look, I spend a lot of my time in focus groups speaking to voters like Steve, and I think among many voters, especially in places of the country like the Red Wall, I think they just feel let down. I think they gave the Conservatives this unique historic moment to do something to the country, to deliver Brexit, to change immigration, to level up those regions, to represent voters like Steve. And I think a lot of those voters feel that the party really squandered that opportunity. And the million-dollar question now is whether people like Steve are going to stay at home and not vote at all, or whether they're going to switch over to the Labour Party. Because if you look at Boris Johnson's voters in 2019, about a fifth of those voters have gone to Labour, but about a third are now saying they're not going to vote for anybody. Now, Sunak's going to be praying those people break for the Conservatives. But if they break for Labour, I mean, things could even get worse for the Conservatives. So there's a lot of people out there frustrated, disillusioned, talking about these big, huge issues, a cost of living crisis, inflation, energy, and they don't feel, for different reasons, that the Conservative government is on top of those issues. And that's why we're seeing the numbers we're seeing. It's why we're seeing the by-election defeats like last night, and it's why we're almost certainly going to see a bruising night for the Conservatives at those local elections in the spring.
Good to talk to you. Thank you. Journalist and author Julie Cook is in the studio. Let's just reflect on that, Julie, should we? They're not connecting. The government isn't connecting, not even with their core voters now.
Exactly, and as our guest there just said, in their own issues that they should be owning, such as Brexit and things like that, they can't hang on to. So I think that's quite telling of how disastrous things are at the moment for them.
It's got to set alarm bells ringing, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think if your core voters of Conservative are saying, I'd rather vote Labour, I'd rather not vote at all, these are serious problems for Rishi Sunak. I don't know how they're going to come back from it, really. I don't know. As you say, self-destruct button almost. Maybe it needs that. Maybe it needs a complete start again, because at the moment it's like a slow death.
But what about, you see, I'm fascinated. Steve in Cleethorpes, you've really piqued my interest, Steve, this morning. He's an older voter, he's a Tory voter, but he says, I expect Labour to win.
Yeah, and I think that's very telling, but particularly because a lot of voters who did always vote Labour voted Conservative in the last election because of Brexit or whatever, those red wall voters, I think they feel a bit betrayed, and I think a lot of them are going to think, well, Labour are going to get in anyway, I might as well vote for them or not at all. And as you say, people who've always voted Conservative feel betrayed, let down. So I think, as you say, what Steve says is pretty accurate of most of the electorate, really.
And the by-election last night, a comfortable win.
Comfortable, yeah, very comfortable, if not semi-landslide. I mean, it was very, very comfortable win, and I think, as we said, it could be indicative of the May local elections. It could even be indicative of the general election.
Interesting, though, because 10.5% swing to Labour, it's a swing that's important, but turnout only 32% or thereabouts. Is that just a case of, well, Tory voters just thinking, well, what's the point? I
think in that particular by-election, possibly, because it had been a Labour stronghold for 17 years, it was Labour through and through, possibly they thought, well, what does my vote count? It could be an element of that. But as you say, it does still show that Labour has a lot of sway, there's a lot of interest in Labour, and I think they're looking in the polls the best bet at the moment.
Julie, good to see you.